I will pass over to Asad Rehman as our first speaker. Asad is the director of War and Want. He's been a long-time activist, climate activist, the international lead with Friends of the Earth. He's also been a social and racial justice campaigner for over a decade, involved with the UN monitoring project in East London. And I think personally, having known Asad for a long time, but particularly around mobilizing that we were doing for the Paris climate talks in 2015, what a long way we've come in terms of the climate justice agenda, some of those discussions, and also having workers focus within those discussions and the whole debate around just transition as well. And I think, Asad has worked tirelessly to bring those discussions into the climate movement, has been a really important ally of the trade union movement in those discussions. So I will hand over to Asad.
And thank you for this kind invitation to join you. My name is Asad Rehman. I'm the director of War and Want. If you don't know War and Want, we're often called the most radical NGO that exists. We were founded by the Labour movement. We work with frontline communities and social movements all around the world, against extractivism, fighting for the right for food sovereignty, for workers' rights. We focus on the root causes of poverty, inequality, and climate injustice. We also campaign here in the UK, supporting trade union and workers in the fight against low pay. We're one of the key organisations working with strikers, work with other trade unions and the fight for workers' rights with regards to Amazon, etc. And I'm also doubly pleased because I'm just abroad from you, and it's a real shame that we are still not able to be together in person, the realities of which, of course, our organising has had to adapt to. I'm just down the road in Forest Gate, and I obviously know Walthamstow very, very well. Look, the fact that you're all here, you don't need me to give you chapter and verse about, the reality of the climate crisis that we face. It's been a very, very long time since we needed climate scientists to tell us that something is absolutely wrong. We can just look, we got killer fires, floods, famines all around the world. We've got 1 million people on the brink of starvation in Madagascar. We've seen devastation in literally every continent in the world. And of course, all of this is happening at just over 1 degree warming. And last month, we had the IPCC with the world's climate scientists, say the latest alarm bell saying this is code red for humanity, that the impacts are happening are much more extreme than they predicted. They're happening faster than they predicted, and that we're literally in the last gasp for this critical guardrail of 1.5 degrees. Of course, from a climate justice perspective, and having campaigned on this issue for decades, our argument many, many years ago was always no temperature level is safe, and it's deadly for many. And the demos that we were making near about 20 years ago, talking about making sure we could limit temperature level to below 1 degree, talking about why climate was an issue of not just environmentalism, but of injustice, economic, social, political, and racial injustice. If only governments had listened. And instead, we know the reality that despite all of the summits, all of the promises that world leaders have made, we're currently still heading to a warming of the planet of over 3 degrees. And if we listen to what the IPCC said about what would happen at 1.5, what will happen at 2, I mean, literally we're talking about, not just millions of people's lives and livelihoods being lost, but of course, billions of people's livelihoods being lost. And what if we had, despite the Paris Agreement, when they all signed and said we're committed to 1.5, yes, governments and world leaders would commit to it. We've had the richest countries pour close to $4.5 trillion in public subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. We've had our banks, including many of the UK banks, HSBC, Barclays, and many others, hand over $4.5 trillion. It's said that, of course, our financial system is the oxygen in which the fossil fuel industry can operate. And even over the last year, during the COVID pandemic. And we've seen, of course, many governments, particularly in the global north, rip up their rule book on neoliberalism, making direct interventions in their economies. They spent close to about $18 trillion dollars in the last year, but yet less than 2% of that has been around the low carbon economy. In fact, most of the money has been, of course, handouts to some of the biggest and most polluting industries, the very industries that we know we need to bring down and replace with more sustainable and just economies. Look, if there was ever a moment for world leaders to step up, of course, this is the critical one. And especially with this climate summit, it's a critical climate summit. Every summit is always told to be is really important. Of course, they all are, but this is incredibly important because of the moment it's being held and some of the decisions that are going to be made. And I have to say, if there was ever a more disastrous government to lead the COP at this moment, it's our own government. Literally, the UK presidency has been absolutely disastrous. You may have seen that their response to even ensuring that we would have an inclusive summit has left many people in the global south unable to attend. Some of the poorest countries no longer able to be even physically at the COP. And of course, we know that what their political agenda has been. You know, the UK government started the year saying the goal of the COP is going to be a net zero 2050, ignoring both science and justice, ignoring the realities of the carbon budget for 1.5, hoping and banking on unproven technologies to come on stream in the future and somehow suck millions and millions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, understanding what the consequences are going to be on our weather systems and our ecosystems. The reality, of course, is that the UK government is really intent on looking at the COP summit as a moment for it to talk about global Britain. It's more intent on having a showpiece where world leaders attend, and you may have heard the Queen, the Pope, and everybody else will be there in Glasgow. And of course, the richest will be there. The richest countries will be there. It will be the voice of the poorest and the most impacted who will be no longer present. And we know from our own government that it's failing to meet its own inadequate climate targets. Its own climate science, UK Climate Change Committee has told that. It has absolutely no plans for the green transition, no detailed plans. It has lots of empty words. It's green lighting massive road building. It's green lighting a massive extraction of further fossil fuels from the North Sea. We have the irony of another coal mine opening here in the UK. On every single indicator, we're heading absolutely in the wrong direction. And we all know that this could so easily be solved. This could be, the government could be leading from the front. We could be talking about retrofitting every single home, ending energy poverty, having warm homes. We could be talking about clean air and allowing people, both, especially the poorest and working class people, to be able to breathe cleanly. And we know the reality between here in East London and some of the richest parts in West London. There's a 10-year difference in life expectancy because of air pollution. We could be gone beyond switching from diesel cars to electric cars, to talking about free public transport, electrified public transport. We could be transforming our societies, our economies. If we ever wanted to see a reality of what the world, of how countries are dealing with global issues, of course, we only need to look at the COVID pandemic. A year ago, we had every world leader talking about, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And since then, the UK has been one of the leading countries that's blocked the lifting of the TRIPS waivers, which would allow COVID vaccines to be made available and treatment to be made available for everybody around the world. We know that close to 4.5 million people have already lost their lives because of COVID. We're over 200 million cases around the world. And incredibly, more people in the UK are vaccinated than across the whole of the continent of Africa. These are the injustices that are built into our system, into our political thinking, and of course they replicate the injustice that we already know exist, the injustices of inequality. We live in a world where, despite all the abundance of wealth, we have half the world's population, 3.5 billion people, surviving on the equivalent of less than $5.50 a day. Not on $5.50, but on the equivalent of what you could buy in the US. And if anybody who's been to the US on $5.50, know it buys you about some milk and some bread. That's the equivalent. Not because there isn't the money available that around the world. If just in the last year alone, we've seen billionaires increase their wealth by $4.5 trillion. At the very same time, we've of course seen workers lose income that is around just over 4 trillion. We've seen hundreds of millions of jobs being lost, and we know that hundreds of millions of more jobs are going to be lost in the future. And we see already what the governments are responding to these moments of crisis. It's a replication of 2008 and the financial crisis, where it will be the poorest and working people who will pay the heaviest price. We're already seeing a rollback of hard-won labour rights all around the world in the name of sort of the recovery. But it doesn't have to be obviously like this. We know that this is a moment where we could have a transformative moment. And I just want to very briefly, and I know I've got only a short period of time, just to talk about our responsibility. Right, we as the COP26, when the COP26 coalition was brought together, was formed, it was explicitly formed that it would move beyond the environment movement, right? That this was not an issue about polar bears, as much as I like polar bears. This was an issue about the political economy, about the economy, about our economic and political systems, about the injustice that exists within our own communities and societies and exists between the global north and the global south. And we brought together trade union movement, faith organizations, environmental justice organizations, Extinction Rebellion, to the Fridays for the Future, to mainstream NGOs, saying that we were going to be explicit and center the realities of climate justice, that we were going to build a movement of movements, that we were going to build our collective power for this transformation, that this would be a moment for us to platform our demands. And our demands, I mean, this moment of crisis, the great irony of this moment of crisis is that whenever you look at what the solutions are, the solutions to the COVID pandemic, the solutions to inequality, the solutions to the climate crisis, they're exactly the same solutions. They are about ensuring that we have an economy that works for people. They're about ensuring that we have social protection, that we have public services, that we have living wages for workers, that we make energy and food a right for absolutely everybody, and not no longer for exploitation by corporate interests. We can transform, of course, both our economies and our world. And that is important for us to be able to put forward that vision. And this is a moment for us to be able to do that. And even more so now, with so many of our partners and allies in the global south unable to attend in Glasgow in person, there is a responsibility on us as a movement here in the UK to put people out on the streets, not just put people out on the streets, but to use this moment, deepen our political education, to connect our movements exactly as you're doing there in Waltham, to weaving our stories together, connecting our movements, whether it's from Black Lives Matter to trade unions fighting for workers' rights, connecting all of these in a powerful movement with a vision, not just looking towards the COP, but also looking beyond. As the COP coalition, we have a series of actions that are going to be taking place in the run-up towards COP. The most important one, of course, is going to be November 6th, the Global Day of Action. We're calling protests up and down the country. We know many people are no longer going to be able to attend Glasgow in person. We're calling for a massive march here in London and a massive test in Glasgow, and decentralised actions all around the country. Put people on the street. All of us know that takes organising. It takes institutions. It takes earning our community organisations, our trade union branches, the political groups that we work in, the schools and the parents as parents, every single one of our networks, and turning them out and saying, this is the moment we need to be out on the street. We need to be making our voices heard. We need to be shaping the agenda and making our demands clear, both to the government and to, of course, to global leaders. And we need to be standing in solidarity with our movements all around the world in amplifying their demands. Look, we know change is going to come. There is no doubt change is going to come. The real question is going to be, what kind of change are we going to have to happen, is going to come, and who will pay the heaviest price? And this is a moment for us to make sure that, as the UN Special Rapporteur said a year ago, where this is a moment of climate apartheid, where the richest will use their wealth to escape the climate crisis and the poorest will be left to die. That doesn't have to be the vision. We know that's the reality now, but it doesn't have to be the vision of the world in the years to come. It's up to us to transform that and to turn that into a vision of a fair, equal, and more sustainable world.